Howdy, I'm Repton and this is Repton Does. In today's video, we're talking through the Beekeepers calendar for Central North Carolina, month by month. Whether you're new to beekeeping or just need a little guidance on what to focus on throughout the year, this calendar will help you stay on track. We'll cover everything from what's happening with your bees to inspections, nutrition, and even what's blooming. Let's get to it. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you're enjoying the content. It really helps us out. We'd love to hear from you too. Drop a comment. Would be super helpful for us. Even though it's winter, there are still a few things we need to check on in January. First, check your hives to make sure they're well insulated, if necessary, and secure. Don't disturb the bees too much. They're keeping warm in their tight winter cluster. Though you'll want to check for any signs of pests like mice. A good mouse guard can go a long way in keeping those little invaders out. Our bees are in their winter cluster, staying cozy and not too active. You might catch a cleansing flight on a warm day, but for the most part, the bees are conserving energy. The queen started laying a bit before the solstice, and you might start seeing some worker brood appearing this month, but no drones. Those guys have been kicked out. Keep inspections light, if at all, in January. It's a good idea to quickly check honey stores by lifting the hive if you're concerned about their food supply. Now's the time to add supplemental sugar cakes or fondant if necessary, but don't overdo it. You want to avoid disturbing the bees too much. Make sure the bees have enough food, but keep the sugar cake and fondant simple. This is a time of conservation for the bees, so the less you disturb them, the better. Make sure they still have access to water if needed. In January, you might see red maples starting to bloom if it's early and we've had a warm winter. These early blooms provide a small but vital nectar source on these rare warm days. February is a quieter month for us, but it's a good time to check the condition of your hives. If you haven't already, now's the time to inspect your insulation, again if necessary. Make sure everything is secure and that the hives are well protected from the cold. It's also a great time to start thinking about any spring management tasks, things like preparing your hive for a potential brood break or making sure your equipment is ready for the warmer months. Bees are still clustered tightly together with minimal activity. The queen may start laying more eggs as the days get longer, and you may start to notice a bit more brood. However, it's still a slow month, and the bees are conserving energy, focusing on keeping warm and using their honey stores. Keep inspections light, if at all, in February, but it's a good idea to check the honey stores by lifting the hive. If you're concerned about their food supply, add supplemental sugar cakes or fondant. Again, don't overdo it. We're trying not to disturb the bees. It's key to make sure they have enough food, though. Add sugar cakes and fondant as necessary. It's a time of conservation, so let's not disturb those bees. In February, you'll start seeing red maple and willow in bloom, again if we've had those warmer winters. Red maple provides both pollen and nectar, weather permitting, while willow blooms late in the month and offers an early source of pollen. We're in March now, and as the days start to warm up, we need to prepare for the coming spring surge. It's a great time to check your hives for any signs of early brood rearing and make sure the bees have enough space. If you haven't already, start planning for spring splits and consider inspecting your equipment. March is when things start to pick up. The queen may have started laying in earnest now, and brood production will be increasing. The colony will start to expand as the weather warms and resources become more available. You might start seeing a lot more activity at the entrance as the bees prepare for the spring nectar flow. Inspect your hives for brood patterns and make sure there is enough room for expansion. If your bees have enough food, consider giving them extra space with a second brood box if necessary. It's also the time to check for diseases and pests, so give your hives a quick once-over. Make sure they still have adequate food reserves and keep an eye on their nectar intake as the temperature rises. It's a time of transition for the bees, and they'll need a solid food base to build up their population for the coming season. In March, you'll start to see dandelions. They're a vital source of nectar and pollen for your bees. Maples continue to provide pollen and nectar, while wild mustard and henbit begin to bloom, offering additional resources. Alright, April is when we really start to see some activity in the hives, and now's the time to get busy. You'll want to make sure your hives have enough room for the growing population, and you may need to consider adding a honey super or two if you haven't already. This is also a good month to get your equipment fully prepped for the warmer weather. The bees are now fully active and the colony is growing fast as the queen continues laying. The brood nest is expanding, and you'll likely see a lot more bees flying in and out of the hive. This is the time to start thinking about potential swarming. Keep an eye out for queen cells and be ready to take action if needed. Do thorough inspections this month to check for signs of swarming, look for queen cells, signs of overcrowding, and ensure there's enough space for the brood nest. This is also a good time to monitor for pests like varroa mites, and you might want to consider adding a mite treatment if you've had problems in the past. Now that nectar sources are becoming more abundant, the bees should be feeding well. However, keep an eye on their stores and supplemental feeding if necessary. If you're busy or building up quickly, they'll need plenty of resources to sustain their growth. In April, the tulip poplar starts blooming, providing a major nectar source for your bees. Blackberry and raspberry bushes are also flowering, offering both nectar and pollen. Clovers, including white and crimson clover, bloom during this month, supporting a strong nectar flow that will help your bees continue building the colony. May is busy for both us and the bees. Swarming is still a concern, and now is the time to make sure you have everything in place to manage. You'll also want to start monitoring your hives for honey production and look out for any signs of disease or pest. Your bees are in full swing now. The queen is laying prolifically and the hive is expanding rapidly. The colony will be out foraging in full force, and you'll see lots of activity around the entrance. With all this growth, it's crucial to monitor for potential swarms. Inspect regularly for signs of swarming. Consider splitting your hives if necessary. You'll also want to keep an eye on the brood pattern to make sure the queen is healthy. It's a busy time, so make sure you're on top of hive management and pest control. Bees will be collecting nectar from a variety of flowers, but be mindful of their honey stores. You may need to add more space with additional honey supers as the bees begin to store more nectar. In May, the tulip poplar continues to provide a strong nectar flow. Blackberries and raspberries are still blooming, providing both nectar and pollen. Clovers, both white and crimson, remain vital nectar sources, and honeysuckle begins to bloom, further enhancing the nectar availability. June is a busy month, with honey production in full swing and the risk of swarming starting to decrease. Now is the time to start managing your honey supers and making sure your hives are strong and healthy heading into the summer. It's also a good time to focus on pest management and overall hive health. The bees are fully active and working hard to gather nectar and pollen. The queen is still laying, but now the focus will shift toward honey production. Your bees should be busy filling up the honey supers, and you may begin to harvest your first honey crop. Make sure to inspect regularly, checking for honey stores and ensuring that the brood nest is still healthy. Monitor for any signs of pest issues, especially varroa mites, and treat if necessary. As the weather warms up, ventilation becomes more important, so check that your hives have proper airflow. As the nectar flow continues, your bees should have access to plenty of food. If they're storing lots of honey, don't add any additional sugar feed unless absolutely necessary. In June, white clover remains a key nectar source. Basswood, also known as linden, provides a strong but brief nectar flow in areas where it's present. Sumac begins blooming, offering nectar and pollen, and Videx, also known as chase tree, starts to bloom, providing both nectar and pollen for your bees. July, your bees will be in full production mode. It's time to check honey supers and start thinking about harvest. It's also a time you'll want to monitor the hive closely for signs of stress, overheating, or dehydration, as the summer heat can take its toll on your bees. You could also be entering the dearth, so as you're checking those honey supers, make sure you're monitoring what they're bringing in and checking to see if they need additional food supplies. Don't take more than you need. Leave something for the bees. Colonies working hard, gathering nectar and produce honey. The queen's laying slows down as the focus shifts to storing food for winter. With a strong nectar flow, you may see your hive filling up with honey quickly. Keep a close eye on honey stores and ensure that the bees aren't running out of space to store nectar. If needed, add more supers or remove capped honey and start your harvest. Be sure to check for signs of pests or diseases and manage accordingly. At this point, your bees should be self-sufficient, gathering nectar and pollen from the surrounding flowers. Keep an eye on their water supply, as hot summer days can dehydrate your colony. In July, sumac continues to provide nectar where it's present. Videx offers both nectar and pollen through the summer. Crepe myrtle blooms in urban and suburban areas, offering nectar and pollen to bees. Wildflowers may also provide sporadic blooms, offering minor nectar sources here and there. August is a month of transition. The hive is wrapping up its honey production. We're in the dearth, and the focus now shifts to preparing for the fall. It's time to start thinking about fall management, including checking for late season pests, ensuring the bees are ready for winter. Bees are still active, but the queen's laying slows as the nectar flow decreases. The hive will start to stabilize, bees shifting focus from brood rearing to honey production to storing for winter. As the weather cools, you'll notice the bees clustering more, preparing for the winter months ahead. By now, you should be inspecting the hive to assess honey stores necessary for winter and prepare for the cooler months. Remove any excess honey supers if needed and check the bees' health. You may need to treat for pests if you haven't already, particularly varroa mites. You live in a region prone to robber bees, consider securing your hives. Bees are still foraging, but the nectar flow is slowing down. Make sure they have enough stores, especially honey and pollen, to get them through the coming colder months. If stores are low, consider providing supplemental feed like sugar syrup to make sure they're well prepared. In August, goldenrod begins to bloom, providing one of the most important late-season nectar sources. Asters start blooming toward the end of the month, offering vital nectar for honey production. Wildflowers, especially late-blooming varieties, can also provide some relief if nectar flow is low. September is a critical month for preparing for winter. As temperatures start to cool, it's essential to wrap up any honey harvesting and start making sure your hives are winter ready. This is a time for careful preparation, as you'll want your bees to have enough food to get through the colder months. With the cooler weather, the bees' activity slows down and the queen's laying significantly decreases. The colony now focuses on packing away enough food for winter. The bees will also start to cluster more tightly as temperatures dip. Now is the time to conduct your final inspections before winter set in. Check for food stores, make sure the bees have enough honey and pollen to survive. If necessary, feed them with a sugar syrup and check for any signs of pests or diseases. Ensure that the bees are stocked up on honey. If they're low, feed them to help them build up their reserves. A well-fed hive will be much more resilient through the winter months. In September, goldenrod continues blooming, providing a vital nectar source. Asters keep blooming, with late-blooming varieties offering additional nectar. Japanese knotweed is another late-season nectar source, especially in areas where it's present. October is the month where you should be wrapping up your beekeeping tasks for the year. The bees are transitioning into their winter cluster, and your job now is to make sure they have enough food and that the hive is secure from the cold. The bees are transitioning into winter mode now, the colony slowing down, and the queen may stop laying eggs altogether. The hive will start to cluster to conserve heat and prepare for the colder months. Your inspections should be fewer now, but it's important to check that the bees have sufficient stores of food. You don't want to disturb the hive too much, but it's a good idea to monitor for any signs of pests or diseases that might interfere with the bees' winter survival. Nutrition, keep it high. Pests, disease, keep it low. Ensure that your bees have enough food to get through the winter. If stores are low, you can provide sugar syrup or fondant. In addition, make sure the hive is sealed properly to prevent moisture buildup that could lead to mold or disease. In October, goldenrod is still a significant nectar source in some areas. Asters continue to provide valuable nectar. Chrysanthemums begin blooming this month, offering both pollen and nectar, which can be especially helpful for bees as they prepare for winter. November is a month where bees settle in for the winter, and it's time to take a step back and let the colony rest. Your main job now is to make sure the hive is secure and that the bees are well fed, as you won't need to do much active work until the spring. The bees are in their winter cluster, most of the activity happening inside the hive. The colony is now more focused on surviving the cold months, and you'll notice fewer flights outside of the hive as the weather cools down. By now, your inspection should be minimal, but it's essential to check that the bees have enough honey stores. Lift the hive and see if it's heavy. You don't need to open it. If you've been feeding them, ensure the food is placed correctly and the hive is tightly sealed to prevent cold air or moisture from entering. Make sure your bees have enough honey or sugar stores to last through the winter. If stores are low, you can add supplemental feeding, fondant, candy boards. If it's warm enough, you could still do sugar syrup. Monitor the weather and make sure the hive is properly insulated when necessary. In November, chrysanthemums may still be blooming, offering some late-season pollen and nectar. Witch hazel may also bloom in central North Carolina, providing a small nectar source for the bees in late fall. December is a quiet month for beekeeping. The bees are resting, and you won't be able to do much active work with the hives. It's time to reflect on the past year, check your equipment for the upcoming season, and prepare for spring. The bees are in their winter cluster, and the colony is focused on survival. The queen is not laying, and the colony is conserving energy by staying in a tight cluster to stay warm. At this point, you shouldn't be opening the hives unless absolutely necessary. If you need to, just make sure the bees have enough food and check for any obvious issues. But overall, the bees need their rest, and so do you. Your bees should still have enough food left to make it through the winter. Check to ensure the stores are plentiful. Again, lift the hive, you don't need to open it. And if not, provide some supplemental feed. Do not let your bees starve. In December, witch hazel begins to bloom in some species, providing a small nectar source if it's warm enough for them to leave. Holly may also bloom in certain varieties, offering late pollen, particularly in milder weather in central North Carolina. And that's it for our Beekeepers calendar. Hope this helps you plan out your beekeeping year and you get the most out of each season. Every month brings new challenges, but also new opportunities to help your bees thrive. Thanks for tuning in, and as always, stay curious and keep exploring. See you next time.